Ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe to this channel right now. MSNBC News. Absurd and extremely detrimental. Eric Holder on Donald Trump's presidential immunity claims. Hold up. The Hill. Holder worried Supreme Court will come to harmful or detrimental conclusion on Trump immunity. It has already taken place. This is reality, ladies and gentlemen. Hit subscribe to this channel right now. I told you about the 9-0 unanimous Supreme Court decision overturning the Colorado ban. I told you that months and days before it took place. And people said, well, it hasn't taken place yet, H.A. Goodman. Why are you saying that it's a done deal? I said, just look at the facts. It's blatantly unconstitutional. A state cannot ban a federal candidate for the presidency. It is unconstitutional. He did not foment a rebellion. You'd have to be a complete imbecile to think so. The Supreme Court, I told my viewers, would be unanimous. It was a unanimous Supreme Court decision. I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, they have already decided to give Trump partial immunity, enough presidential and constitutional immunity, and they have already decided on this. It's just a matter of, in my humble view, it's just a matter of them telling the special counsel, the world, it's a done deal. Whether it's tomorrow or this weekend or Monday, it is a done deal. And I told you that. So hit subscribe to this channel. Absolutely, categorically, the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of Trump. Really quickly, I want to just give you the basis for the ruling, and then we can go on to exactly why. You cannot prevent a president from performing a speech. End of story. Game, set, match. That's a done deal. Democrats and the special counsel I'm trying to imprison the president. They're trying to imprison Trump for trying to defraud the country. The opposite took place. Hit subscribe to this channel right now. He had a right as president to voice his concerns, and he did so via a speech. He had literally nothing to do with the criminal activity. After his speech, he told people to remain peaceful. They're going to overturn the guilty verdict as well. It is blatantly unconstitutional. And hit subscribe to this channel if you're new. A state cannot level a federal statute at anyone without the federal government involved. In this case, the FEC dropped the case. You have the Colorado ban that was overturned unanimously. You're going to maybe even have one or two of the liberal justices, although it'll probably be 6-3, that Trump does get immunity, presidential immunity in some capacity, meaning he's allowed to perform a speech, he's allowed to speak to his political allies, just like any president does, within states throughout the country. He did nothing wrong. Literally, the man did nothing wrong. And so they're probably going to bring this back to lower courts to find out a fact-finding mission. What is it that he did that was beyond the bounds of what a president can do? That is a huge victory for Trump. He dissolves the special counsel after November when he wins, and he will win. Hit subscribe to this channel. Let's get started, ladies and gentlemen. We'll get right into it in terms of immunity with the great Alan Dershowitz. It's already taken place, people. They've already given him presidential immunity. That's why Eric Holder, that's why Democrats are livid. They're after the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, this is the most important month in years for the Supreme Court, ladies and gentlemen. And I've been telling you that endlessly. This is the great Alan Dershowitz explaining exactly why he will get presidential immunity. And I've been telling you this from day one.
Alan Dershowitz, professor emeritus at Harvard Law School, the author of Get Trump. Maybe there'll be a second book where they can't get Trump because of this. Professor Dershowitz, I've been dying to talk to you about this. When this decision broke, everyone's, on the left, their heads exploded. On the right, a lot of people say, yes, this must be to the nation's highest court. Where do you stand on the fact, first, that they accepted this, and how they may rule? I'm not sure de facto is fair, as I heard one pundit say.
This is a serious case, and I don't think they will simply affirm the lower court, which went too far. And I don't think they will accept completely Trump's arguments, which went too far.
Anthony, thank you as always. By the way, to my super chat, thank you. To the members, thank you. To the people around the world watching, thank you for watching in the UK, Canada, Australia, the Philippines, around the world, Nigeria, Korea. Thank you so very much. God bless you. Partial immunity is all you need. You don't need complete immunity. They are leveling a very broad, ambiguous statutes against Trump. They're claiming he's trying to defraud the country. This is not like Watergate, where there was a break-in and a burglary. This is a broad, ambiguous, all-encompassing, vague legal statute where they have to prove intent and a whole bunch of other things. They can't do that, especially when you have a president with Nixon v. Fitzgerald that is immune from civil cases, and a president that has constitutional and presidential immunity. And up until recently, up until Democrats trying to break norms and traditions like they always do. So he'll get partial immunity, which means they have to rewrite the indictment, and they have to find out what is and isn't presidential conduct, which is impossible for them to do. And Trump has the right to dissolve the special counsel. When he becomes president, he will.
I suspect they will come down with a divided decision, maybe 6-3, who knows, but a decision that splits the differences and gives Trump some immunity even after he left office for acts that were of his presidency, but will deny him immunity for actions which are primarily political. The Supreme Court did the right thing by taking the case. It's an important case. And even though it will stop these trials from occurring before the election, that these trials should not occur before the election. That really does constitute, in effect, election interference.
You've said that, yes.
The system is playing too great a role in our election. We do not want our president to be determined by prosecutors or by judges. We want them to be determined by the people.
I want you to talk about the process. This was Donald Trump's right to bring it to the Supreme Court. This was any citizen's right. This is the process that's in place from our founding fathers. But some on the left have been very critical, acting as if Nancy Pelosi tweeting, "No one's above the law." I mean, this is just where, in fact, the case goes.
Anthony, thank you again for watching for so long. And everybody, thank you so much for your kind words and for being just so wonderful and tuning in. When Democrats say nobody's above the law, Trump will indict a number of people when he becomes president. And he will do so because the people he indicts actually did commit crimes. It won't be vague legal statutes. It won't be broad, ambiguous allegations. It'll be because they specifically did they committed specific, easy to understand crimes: bribery, graft. You know what? I think the statute of limitations is done on the servers, but there's easy to understand crimes. Trump doesn't have a laptop with bribery and graft emails linked to those crimes. Democrats do. Trump doesn't have servers with top secret intelligence on them. These are like easy to understand things that are illegal. You cannot have private servers with top secret intel, although that's the statute of limitations might have run out on that. It is impossible from a cybersecurity perspective to put classified data onto servers. Could you imagine if Trump had servers? Could you imagine if 50 intel officials tried to protect Trump and Eric Trump or Donald Trump Jr. Because they had a laptop full of emails linked to pay-to-play schemes? that would never happen. If Trump had a laptop like Biden and Hunter did, he would have already been in prison. So, and what Biden did was probably worse than even what Hillary Clinton did, because that you have, well, there's a whole lot, we can go on forever, but let's continue. And one other thing, they keep saying, the whole point is they keep saying that, well, nobody's above the law. The problem, however, is that um, when it is about Democrats being above the law, then suddenly you have a different type of a different type of mentality. Democrats would be saying Trump is a despot, authoritarian, a tyrant, totalitarian, um, and that he's a monster. But when they go after Trump, they say nobody's above the law.
Goes and should go. Can you talk a little bit about some of the criticism there and explain to our viewers why that is so dangerous? I think because this is what our nation is founded. These are the systems, these are the constructs like our Constitution.
Look, the hard left radicals, including some of my former colleagues at Harvard, Professor Lawrence Tribe and others, think the Supreme Court belongs to them. And if the Supreme Court doesn't rule the way they want it to rule, they think it shouldn't rule at all. And these were people, including me, I'm a liberal, who was an activist court back in the day when the Supreme Court was ruling very much in favor of the liberal rights, whether it be abortion or the right to vote or many other rights. Now that the Supreme Court is more conservative, these same scholars are saying, well, the Supreme Court should stay out of deciding these cases. It's pure hypocrisy, and you shouldn't listen to academics, and especially Harvard professors, who clearly have an agenda here and who aren't interested in a neutral approach to Supreme Court adjudication. They just want it their way.
Can't have it both ways. Professor Alan Dershowitz, as always, a pleasure to have you, sir. Thank you so much for being with us today here.
So it's essentially a done deal, ladies and gentlemen. I've been telling you before these Supreme Court decisions take place, not because I'm Nostradamus, although pretty good. I mean, not many people were saying there would be a 9-0 unanimous Supreme Court decision overturning the absurd Colorado ban, but there was, and I told you there would be. It's a done deal. Everybody knows that you cannot accuse Trump as a president of having zero presidential immunity. They're trying to say that now he wants to be a king. Being a king or monarch does not entail having normal presidential constitutional protections against blatantly partisan motivated indictments. Indictments motivated by partisanship. And so it's like, if they don't convict Trump, and they'll have the New York conviction overturned on constitutional and constitutional grounds, you cannot have the state of New York decide Federal Election Commission statutes. That is not even possible within our system of government. The Supreme Court is going to protect Trump from these apoplectic, completely absurd indictments. This is basic civics, ladies and gentlemen. A president is protected from legal consequences if he is just acting as a president. So he was allowed to perform a speech. He was allowed to contest results. He did not foment a rebellion. He did not tell people to commit crimes. And so they're going to now have to explain, well, what did this man do? And if you don't believe me, you can listen to John Roberts right here. But before you do, let's go ahead and listen to Greg Jarrett. Then we'll listen to the Supreme Court justices talk about this. This is really interesting.
you see the arguments falling in that case?
Well, as you know, I predicted the outcome of this case exactly, how the court would decide 9-0 using the fifth section of the 14th Amendment. On the issue of immunity, I'm going to make a prediction here, too. I think both sides argue too broadly. I think Trump was wrong to have his lawyer immunized unless he gets impeached first. That went too far. The answer should have been, of course not. Now let me explain. But I also think the lower court went way too far by having no immunity whatsoever and saying that whatever a president may have had immunity while in office, he loses that once he leaves office. I hope and I suspect that the court granted cert in this case in order to come out with a nuanced decision that focuses on precisely what are presidential acts. And if they're within the scope of presidential acts, then they have to go beyond the presidency itself. Let me give you an example. President Eisenhower in 1954 sends troops down to implement Brown versus Board of Education. One of the children or one of the police officers is killed. And the new president coming in, a Democrat, years later, wants to indict Eisenhower for having done that, even though it was in his presidential authority. I think we would all agree that there has to be some immunity, and we would all agree that he can't have total immunity for everything he did as a politician or as an individual. So I think the Supreme Court, hopefully, will come out with a nuanced decision that will give guidance to the lower courts as to when immunity is applicable, when it's not applicable. We can bring the country together on this issue as well, instead of simply having extreme views on both sides.
I love Alan Dershowitz. I love Professor Dershowitz, but I want to say this with all humility. The Democrats will be livid, and they will never accept any Supreme Court decision that doesn't go their way. The Supreme Court does not care about the substance of Trump's speech in January. The Supreme Court is going to say, hey, he's allowed to perform a speech. What is it about his speech that you didn't like? And then they're going to have to actually prove specific. They're going to slice and dice the indictment, or they're going to have to rewrite the indictment completely and explain, well, he didn't use the word peaceful enough, because there was nothing in his speech that fomented any type of rebellion. Yet they still write, and this is you have journalists who are completely delusional, deceptive, deceitful. They are still writing that Trump tried to foment a rebellion. They're still writing that there was a rebellion. Nothing could be further from the truth. You had chaos and mayhem, the same type of chaos and mayhem you had every day that summer. And I agree with why people peacefully demonstrated, but you had billions in property damage. Nobody cared. They didn't call that a rebellion. But anyway, let's continue.
You know, I actually concur with what you just said. And I think, Greg, what Professor Dershowitz is saying is that the argument of absolute immunity probably is too broad, and a more nuanced judgment of the court, I think, would probably be more appropriate in this case, and maybe even the better argument for the court. Your take?
Well, I think the Supreme Court looked at the circuit court decision and said, hey, you went way too far. You're dismissing any notion of immunity, even if a president acts consistent with his duties. That is absurd logically. And it's inconsistent, by the way, and this is the important part, with the Supreme Court precedent 4 decades ago that a president does have absolute immunity from civil lawsuits as long as his actions fall within the outer perimeter of his official acts. Well, you know, Sean, the exact same reasoning applies to criminal prosecutions. If it's otherwise, my goodness, the chilling effect on presidential decision-making would trigger paralysis. Instead of a chief executive, so America would be ruled by a committee of lawyers. They'd be afraid to do anything out of fear of future prosecution.
Greg, let me ask you this. Would a more nuanced version versus the argument of absolute immunity maybe be, of course, you have freedom of speech, but you can't yell fire in a crowded building? Would that be... Exactly. Would there be an analogy there?
Yes.
And you would expect the court to do that.
And Jordan said this as well. I suspect the current justice.
By the way, I love the positivity and just the good vibrations in the chat. God bless you all. You're all awesome. Thank you for watching, everybody.
Will extend the existing immunity standard in civil actions to criminal cases and then remand the Trump case back to the trial court to decide whether Trump's acts are covered as official acts.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it is a done deal. When you have Eric Holder, who I believe was held in contempt of Congress, I think it was the first attorney general to be held in contempt, and Merrick Garland was as well. So you've had two Democratic Party attorney generals held in contempt. But when he's saying the Hill, Supreme Court will come to a harmful conclusion, everybody knows this. It's unconstitutional. And I have been telling you he's going to get they overturned the Colorado ban. I told you they would. They're going to give him partial immunity, which all he needs is partial immunity, which means that he's protected. He's allowed to perform a speech. He's allowed to speak to political allies. He's allowed to contest results. What is it that this man did? So they're trying to, the indictment says he lied and was deceitful and he knew that he was lying. To this day, Trump still thinks that he was railroaded like Bernie Sanders was when they completely railroaded Bernie Sanders in an absurd farce and theatrical performance of a primary. So they can't prove any of these things. Number one, because they're not true. Trump didn't believe that, Democrats were acting in good faith, and neither do most Republicans. And he's allowed to perform a speech. They're literally trying to indict him because of a speech, ladies and gentlemen. Can't do that. That's why I've been telling you for a long time that he's going to get the presidential immunity. Colorado ban, presidential immunity, 2 victories, done deal, game, set, match, and then the Supreme Court will overturn the absurd, unconstitutional guilty verdict. 3 major, monumental, historic victories, legal and constitutional victories for Donald Trump. It's going to be amazing. It is amazing. And that's why Democrats despise the Supreme Court.
All right, let's bring back our legal panel. Carrie Urban is with us, along with Jonathan Turley and Leo Terrell. Jonathan, let's start with you. What do you make of the immunity arguments at the court this morning and this idea of, well, you can't give a president complete immunity because there are likely some things that a president could be prosecuted for, but you give some sort of limited immunity, and how do you draw that line?
By the way, really quickly, if Trump was Richard Nixon and there was a break-in, see, a burglary is an easy to understand, straightforward criminal act. A cover-up of a burglary or paying off people, which is what Nixon did to cover up a burglary, this is an easy to understand criminal act. Trying to deceive the country, which is what he's being accused of, is very difficult to prove. The indictment is written through the sensibilities of morally superior, highly educated liberal Democrats. Just like what they did in New York, which was unconstitutional, they elevated misdemeanors into felonies. I mean, they contort themselves into pretzels trying to get Trump. It wasn't a burglary. It wasn't a specific criminal act that you could understand, that most people understand. And that's why what Democrats are doing is completely unconstitutional.
Well, I think there were points in this argument that should be viewed as quite positive for the Trump team. First of all, you had roughly 4 justices referring to sending this back for further deliberations. If they do that, it's hard to imagine the trial judge getting a trial before the election. And if Trump is reelected, you might not have any trial at all. But the argument went along the lines of what many of us had predicted. That is, the justices seemed equally uncomfortable with with the sweeping arguments of the Trump team and the sweeping decision by the D.C. Circuit. I thought the real haymaker of the argument was delivered by Chief Justice John Roberts, who was openly mocking of the D.C. Circuit, which had this awful standard where they said, well, a president can be prosecuted effectively when he's prosecuted. That is, they had this line that suggested that the fact of prosecution meant that the acts could be prosecuted. And Chief Justice Roberts legitimately said, "But what type of standard is that? I mean, don't we have to have something more?" All of those comments would suggest that there are justices sort of groping in the dark here for a middle road where there might be some immunity for public acts, official acts, but not for private acts.
Really interesting analysis there, Carrie. And I felt like I learned as we were all listening to this together.
If you read the indictment by the special counsel, they're actually telling you the following, that Trump, now listen to this, ladies and gentlemen, this is very important. This is exactly why you should hit subscribe to this channel if you're new. When I'm telling you that it's a done deal and that the Supreme Court has already ruled, just like I did before the Colorado ban, the Democratic Party, or the special counsel in this case, made very broad, ambiguous, sweeping claims that are not rooted in reality. They accused Trump of not having been president anymore when he performed his January speech. He was no longer president in their book. Why? Because his speech was partisan in nature and he lied to people. Well, Democrats, whenever Mashed Potato Brains actually opens his mouth, he's lying to people and it's partisan. Nobody's accusing him of no longer being president. The indictment says he was no longer protected by the Constitution. He was no longer truly a president, or at least he was no longer protected by the United States Constitution as president because his speech was partisan. What? That makes no sense. It's blatantly unconstitutional. Okay, and nothing they say like, oh, he committed a rebellion, he tried to overthrow the government. This is all absurd. He didn't do any of that stuff. The Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately stated there's no evidence. There's no evidence he tried to do anything like that. So that's why it's going to be overturned.
A lot from the questioning from Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. And it was his questions that were followed up by Amy Coney Barrett, Ketanji Brown Jackson. They all referenced back to them. What was your takeaway?
I was struck by I thought, extreme positions of both sides. Yeah. You have Donald Trump, who is our unity. And I thought to myself, well...
By the way, President Trump's legal team didn't say that he could actually eliminate an opponent. All they said is that you would have to be impeached first, which you probably wouldn't have to be impeached first. But they admit that, yeah, it's an obvious, that would be an obvious crime. But as president, the Constitution is you impeach the president. And meaning that the Senate also convicts him. That's all they said. They didn't say, yeah, he can eliminate anyone. They never said that. Yet another thing that I forget.
How can a president function if they have no immunity whatsoever from criminal prosecution for their official acts? And Brett Kavanaugh, who I worked for when he was going through his confirmation process, I thought he raised some very interesting points. He talked about how troubled he was for the trajectory of the American presidency if they were to side with the Department of Justice's approach, which is this zero immunity, this posture. And I was also struck by DOJ's argument that, well, don't worry about it because prosecutions are not politically motivated. We take oaths about that kind of stuff. And I thought, how can you possibly say that given what we are all watching happen in New York? And secondly, the person who made that argument was on special counsel Bob Mueller's team, which we all know what that was, a 2-year, $35 million investigation that was driven by politics and failed.
Yeah. So, Leo, the argument really comes down here, too. It seems that the court is considering was trying to challenge the election, a public act or a private act. It's like a president might have immunity from ordering drone strikes.
They tried to not just say he contested, but they tried to say that he contested and then fomented an obstruction of Congress. That he went, as he was contesting, he tried to foment obstruction of a congressional act. He didn't try to do any of that. What happened was that it was a terrible day. He should have. I love Trump, but he should have understood that anything he does, they're going to try to make it as difficult as possible. That day was a prime example.
Against the heads of terrorist organizations. But if the president poisons his entire, does challenging the results
talking about
does challenging the results of an election fall?
Well, I'll tell you, you had the Trump team talking about the challenging of the election as an official act. You also heard him make reference, the Trump attorney talked about President Grant sitting down federal troops to Louisiana. So I think he made that argument. But I want to be very clear. You notice the difference, the quality and the richness of the arguments that you heard on the Supreme Court level? Professor Turley mentioned the reference that John Roberts had about the appellate court. I mean, it was generic. You had very detailed analysis over the last 2 hours. And I'll add you another point. Justice Barrett raised a little nugget about the issue of state prosecution, whether or not the president's immunity goes there. I hope the trial judge in New York heard that. The one critique I would have against the Trump attorney, you never waive a rebuttal argument. And I heard that when he did that, I was shocked. You always have the last word. He abandoned that last word. Shame on him.
Jonathan, what did you think of that?
Yeah, I tweeted at the same time. I was quite surprised. I've never seen a rebuttal waived because there was a lot there still on the table. I thought that the counsel for the special counsel was really struggling at points, and at others he was able to eke out some good solid ground. That's your chance to come in there and to hit hard without any rebuttal coming from the other side. So I was surprised by that. I also have to echo the view that of the counsel for the special counsel, Dreeben, who said, the protection here is basically we're the government, we're here to help you. I mean, that's basically what his argument was. His argument was, we're the Department of Justice, perish the thought that we would ever go after someone for political purposes.
You'll hear that exchange in a second. It's hilarious. It's hilarious.
And that led people like Alito and others to go, whoa, okay, now you got a long history of some pretty sordid, horrible stuff. And he wasn't even referring to the Trump years. And sort of counsel sort of backed up a little bit on that. But the point of the justices was still a good one. They said, we don't really like to base the status and stability of the presidency on we're the government, we're here to help you.
10 most terrifying words in the English language. I'm from the government and I'm here to help you.
So notice how when it's Trump, when Trump indicts people, and he will, for actual crimes, they're going to be like, he's an authoritarian. This is a brilliant exchange between John Roberts and the special counsel. Another reason why I can tell you, I've been telling you for a long time, it's a done deal, and you're going to, maybe tomorrow, it could be any moment now. Huge victory for Trump. People, be on this channel. Please go ahead, hit subscribe and watch. I mean, I have been sounding the proverbial alarms on this, and I've been telling you it's a huge victory for Trump, ladies and gentlemen, an enormous victory.
Said, quote, the Court of Appeals below, whose decision we're reviewing, said quote, a former president can be prosecuted for his official acts because the fact of the prosecution means that the former president has allegedly acted in defiance of the laws. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, I think it sounds tautologically true, but
really quickly, John Roberts is asking the special counsel lawyer, hey, wait a second, what did Trump do that was illegal? The special counsel said, well, what he did was illegal is get indicted. The fact we indicted him means he committed a crime. Therefore, he's not protected by the Constitution. What are you talking about? Check it out.
But I want to underscore that the obligation of a president is to take care that the laws are faithfully executed.
Well, I think it sounds tautologically true as well, and that, I think, is the clearest statement of the court's holding, which is why it concerns me. As I read it, it says simply, a former president can be prosecuted because he's being prosecuted.
Well, I would not suggest that that's either the proper approach in this case or certainly not the government's approach. A prosecution does, of course, invoke federal criminal law. The allegations have to be presented to a grand jury, which votes upon the indictment.
Well, that's what I mean, shortly after that statement in the court, that court's opinion, that's what they said, but there's no reason to worry because the prosecutor will act in good faith, and there's no reason to worry because a grand jury will have returned the indictment. Now, you know how easy it is in many cases for a prosecutor to get a grand jury to bring an indictment, and reliance on the good faith of the prosecutor may not be enough in the some cases. I'm not suggesting here. So if it's tautological, and those are the only protections that the Court of Appeals below gave, and that is no longer your position, you're not defending that position, why shouldn't we either send it back to the Court of Appeals or issue an opinion making clear that that's not the law?
Well, I am defending the Court of Appeals judgment, and I do think that there are layered safeguards that the court can take into account that will ameliorate concerns about unduly chilling presidential conduct. That concerns us. We are not endorsing a regime that we think would expose former presidents to criminal prosecution in bad faith, for political animus, without adequate evidence. A politically
But of course they are. That's the point. And then he goes on to say a partisan prosecution would be against the oath that we took. It's like, well, yeah, that's what you're doing right now. It is blatantly partisan. They've all waited until, look, Democrats have been telling Americans, don't believe your eyes, don't believe your lying eyes. It's all about the rule of law. They would never act that way if Trump was indicting them right before November. And it's not going to work anyway. Trump's going to win in a landslide. I told you a long time ago that Clinton would lose to Trump. Nobody was saying that. Only me and Styx Exenhammer in all of YouTube and all of the internet, really. And so this is yet another huge victory. He's on his way to victory in November. It's just a matter of the Constitution. You cannot bend and contort and distort the United States Constitution just to imprison Trump. It's not your divine right to imprison this man if he's innocent, which he is.
Driven prosecution would violate the Constitution under Waite versus United States. It's not something within the arsenal of prosecutors to do. Prosecutors take an oath. The Attorney General takes an oath. So, I don't want to overstate Your Honor's concern with potentially relying solely on good faith. But that's an ingredient, and then the courts stand ready to adjudicate motions based on selective prosecution, political animus. This court relied on those very protections in the Vance case just 2 years ago.
But what concerns me is, as you know, the Court of Appeals did not get into a focused consideration of what acts we're talking about or what documents we're talking about because of its adoption of what you termed, and I agree quite correctly, as a tautological statement, because the fact of prosecution was enough to take away any official immunity. The fact of prosecution, they had no need to look at what courts normally look at when you're talking about a privilege or immunity question.
Well, I think I would take issue, Mr. Chief Justice, with the idea of taking away immunity. There is no immunity that is in the Constitution unless this court creates it today. There certainly is no textual immunity. We do not submit that that's the end of the story. United States versus Nixon wasn't a textually based case. Neither was Nixon versus Fitzgerald. We endorse both of those holdings. But what is important is that no public official has ever had the kind of absolute criminal immunity that my friend speaks of, even with respect to the speech or debate clause. It's very narrow. It's focused on legislative acts. It's not focused on everything that a congressman does. And it responds to a very specific historical circumstance that basically involved the two other branches potentially harassing legislators and preventing them from doing their jobs. That's why it ended up in the Constitution. Nothing like that ended up in the Constitution for the presidents, and that's because one of the chief concerns of the framers was the risk of presidential misconduct. They labored over.
Whenever you get a, history lesson about what the framers were thinking, every single Supreme Court justice rolls their eyes and says, yeah, we don't care. These are all brilliant people pertaining to history. They don't really need, when you're relegated to giving a history lesson to these justices, you've already lost the argument. This is a really interesting discussion between John Yoo and Mark Levin.
Pleasure to have our friend Professor John Yoo, UC Berkeley Law School, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General, Hoover Institution visiting fellow, very busy but not too busy to not be able to come here. Thank you. John Yoo, what do you make of my points? I mean, the reason we're in the Supreme Court is because the Department of Justice, this Attorney General, and this prosecutor are doing things that normal administrations will not do. They're pushing the edge of the envelope in every respect, no?
Mark, I think you nailed it in your monologue. I'm so glad you brought that out because everyone, of course, is talking about the Supreme Court and what are they going to be doing about immunity. The Supreme Court has never had to hear a case like this because no president in the history of the republic has tried to prosecute one of his predecessors. That is crossing a Rubicon, and it creates a terrible incentive for future presidents because now they always have to be worried. They always have to be looking over their shoulder that some president in the future is going to go after them. So what you have here is the absence of statesmanship, leadership, common sense. There are no doubt presidents in the past who might have done things that other people might have thought had been criminal, but future presidents always thought it's in the best interest of our country to pardon a Nixon, to get past controversies and look to the future and do what's best for the American people. Unfortunately, it's Joe Biden who has triggered this constitutional crisis by continuing to press this special counsel investigation. And that's where the fault really lies in all of this.
And John, I'm listening to some of these justices, and they have been sucked into this world. I mean, I'm listening to Barrett. Is that private conduct? Or is that official conduct? I mean, do they actually think these 9 justices are going to sit there and come up with a meaningful definition to apply in all circumstances when a president is sitting there under God knows what conditions, making decisions, having to make decisions and wonder? And I heard Judge Jackson say, but they have all the lawyers, and what are they going to have, criminal defense lawyers sitting around them on determining whether they're going to hit this place or hit that place?
See, that's why what happened with Nixon Watergate was a burglary and a break-in. End of story. It's easy to understand what a burglary is. It's not straightforward. It's vague. It's broad, ambiguous to accuse Trump of defrauding the country. What does that mean? Well, what did he do that was an unofficial act? A speech is an official act. As president, he could speak to whomever he wants on the state and local level, political allies. He can do any of those things. Why can't Trump do those things, whereas every other president did those things? What was different? Oh, he tried to foment a rebellion. No, he didn't. The Federal Bureau of Investigation found no effort at all, no concerted effort at all to obstruct or commit a rebellion. They keep on lying about Trump and it's become a reality to them.
Or make these decisions. They're buying into this whole thing because it's Donald Trump. What is the potential, truly, for doing permanent damage to separation of powers, the power of the presidency, and empowering future administrations to go after past administrations like they do in these fascist and Marxist regimes?
If Donald Trump wins this case, it will be because of that exact point. It's because let's just stop and talk about the future, because that's what's important. And the question is, what is this going to do to presidents when they have to make the hardest decisions for the country? We want them to think about, oh, is my successor or my political opponent in the next election, who's already going to get the nomination from his party, are they going to turn the power of the government against me? What we'll end up doing is we'll have presidents who won't want to exercise any leadership. They won't take any risks. They won't make the tough calls because they're going to be worried that some successor there is going to want to throw them in jail. And isn't that...
Hey, Sean Hannity.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that's why you have Eric Holder basically telling the world that the Supreme Court has already decided on this. The Supreme Court essentially has already decided on this. It's a done deal. Trump has won another Supreme Court victory. They are going to try to dismantle the Supreme Court. They're going to try to disparage it, demean it, disrespect it, because Democrats are used to overwhelming media support. The average life of a morally superior, wonderful liberal Democrat is going to bed at night with Kimmel and Colbert, waking up with the Washington Post and New York Times, and watching MSNBC and CNN all day, constantly 24/7 regurgitating and fomenting the same biases, upholding and justifying their belief system, their bias, their vitriol and venom against Trump every second of the day. The problem is that the Supreme Court doesn't care. It's the only institution that isn't influenced by this mania against Trump within the Democratic Party. So hit subscribe. It's going to take place. They essentially already did give Trump partial immunity. And you might get tomorrow, when it happens, or the next day, or Monday, watch this channel, people. Barnes, Homestead, everyone here, thank you so very much. Lynn, to the members on this channel, thank you. My Patreon is below if you want to support my work long term. Be here November 5th, ladies and gentlemen. Trump will regain the Oval Office. I've been spot on every single thing I've been telling you regarding the Supreme Court. And then once we get the immunity victory, and we will, we've already gotten the victory essentially. Then they overturn the unconstitutional conviction, and they should be doing that. And I think they will before November 5th, and hopefully they will before July 11th. His legal team almost certainly has filed the appropriate writ, and Mark Levin talked about that. The avenue to the Supreme Court to overturn the New York State conviction, they've already probably taken that route to overturn it, and the Supreme Court hopefully will, I think, before November 5th, but hopefully before July 11th, before sentencing. Anyway, hit subscribe. Huge, monumental, historic victory on the way. Thanks, everybody. God bless you all. Thank you so much for watching. I will be back tomorrow, hopefully for some amazing, awesome news. God bless you. God bless America.